Hello everybody. So this first video that I'm making about Ableton is just a very general overview of the Ableton Arrange window. Um, I'm basically covering here what you see on the screen right now in a very general way, including audio inputs and outputs, etc. Um, so to get started, when you open Ableton, you have to designate the inputs and outputs for audio sound. Every audio program, Ableton, Pro Tools, Logic, FL Studio, whatever, has its own dedicated inputs and outputs for sending and receiving audio signal. So that often will be default, but you might need to change it. And you change it in Ableton by going over to the live button at the top here in the corner and clicking on settings. Settings will pull up this window, and you can see right now I have my, if I go to the audio tab, no input device and no output device. So if I wanted to hear the sound out of the speakers, I would choose the MacBook speakers. And then obviously sometimes I have other outputs or inputs. If I, for instance, plugged in some headphones, the headphones would not work automatically. I would need to go in here and choose headphones as the output. Now, if you have no microphone or you're not using any sort of microphone input, then your input device can be no device. So I could, for instance, switch this like this and then leave no device here. But if I had a microphone, for instance, the laptop's microphone, or right now I'm using a Yeti Nano just to record my sound better, I could select these inputs and outputs. So I'll go ahead and select the Yeti Nano just to set it. So you can see here the default sample rate is 48,000 hertz. So we'll use that. We'll leave the latency and all these things the same. Now the only other thing that I would change is to, I can't remember where it is, to turn off the analysis file. So Ableton, unfortunately, creates this extra file every time there's audio added to the project. And I'm not even sure what it does, but it's an analysis file of the audio itself. And if you turn this off, it no longer creates that file, and you don't end up with extra audio file, or they're not audio files, extra analysis files in your project that are just kind of in the way and annoying. There are obviously other options in here that you can choose. One that I obviously recommend personally is to go to theme and color and then play around with these different themes. I always choose dark mode on most apps, and here I can choose it. So, and I can make some other changes if I want. If we have plugins, third-party plugins, I can also add them here and assign them. We can also rescan to look for third-party plugins, which we'll talk about at another time. So once I have this set up, you can see over here, it's showing me that the audio driver's on. If I click on the 3%, that's showing me the average CPU usage right now. It also tells me what the engine is on, and it's going to make sound. So let's just talk about this screen now and all of its elements. Now, Ableton has two primary modes screen-wise, and it's really, they're very, very different. So it's important to remember this. This is the arrangement window, but if I hit the tab key, it will switch to what's called session view. And actually it's called arrangement view and session view. Up in the very, very top right here, you can see these two different tabs or different icons. These are switching between the arrangement and the session view. Now there'll be another video about session view because it's a very different way of working in Ableton, but that's what those buttons do. And again, it is also just the tab key. If I hit tab, it's going to switch between them. So over here at the very, let's start at the very top left. We have several buttons here. The first one is the one that you might want to use if you can't see stuff. So if this is closed, you can see the arrangement window is going to be just kind of, it's not showing anything on the far left. If I click on this button, it's going to open up I would consider the library and all sorts of things. So first of all, collections are really useful. They're ways of deciding lists of plugins or sounds that I want inside groups. So for instance, I could make I have one called synths here, and I basically can assign any synthesizers that I use regularly into the synths tab. And now when I click on the synths tab, only those synthesizers are going to show up. It's not going to be a huge list of other things. Now you can see I've created some other tabs, one called live. These are plugins that I use all the time when I'm doing Ableton in a live setting. I also have VSTs and my favorites folders, kind of everything that I use regularly. And then down here in the library essentially makes up every single type of audio or MIDI instrument or effect or sound that's available for Ableton. So you can see that, for instance, if I click on all, it can be really useful, for instance, to use the search command. So imagine I want to find a violin, for example. I might click on all and then type in violin. And then every sound that has a violin, all is going to pop up here. Now you can see some of these are just straight up audio files. And then others, like this ADG, is an actual instrument. So if I click on this, you can see Dante's violin has now been added down here at the bottom, and it's an instrument. So we'll get into that more later. But everything associated with this project that has the name violin in it will pop up. Now, if I go to sounds, that's going to limit me to certain things. Only instrument plugins, essentially, and their presets. So we'll get into this more later, but basically, imagine I have an instrument called, like one's called operator, right? Operator has lots of different settings. So if I click on operator, if I go to instruments here, you can see I can scroll down here to operator. And if I double click on it, it's going to add operator down here at the bottom. So that is an actual instrument that's been added. If I wanted to, I could expand the operator tab and then see all of the possible instruments or presets inside operator. So if I click on this, this is an instrument inside operator that has specific settings. So, and then audio effects is another tab, and this shows you all the plugins that are audio, they affect the audio, right? So for instance, I could add hybrid reverb. The hybrid reverb is down here now. It's been added to the arrangement window, and it's been added to this track. So anyways, as we go, MIDI effects, then you have modulators. These are different ways of changing the sound over time. Max for Live tab. We also have just plugins in general. So these are external, like third-party plugins. We'll talk about that later, etc. as we go down. Okay. And then down here at the bottom here where it says places, this is where you're able to add your own folders. So first of all, if I want to go to Ableton too, I can download different packs as well. So you can see down here, it says 2 packs are available, and I can download them if I wanted to and install them. But also under user library, I can add a folder and navigate to the hard drive and add, as you can see, like folders that I have, like these glitch effects that I made, or some somatic effects or samples that I use for various things. And that just makes it quick access to your own folders inside the computer inside Ableton. So the filters is also very powerful. So if I wanted to, for instance, go to instruments and then filter, you can see that I can choose different types of settings. So I could say I only want drums and I want it to be sampler. Or no, I'm sorry, I guess I can't expand that. So then all of the drum instruments pop up. I can change these if I want based on, like, I want acoustic only. There's just a bunch of different way of filtering your options here. Let's look up at the very top here as well as we go on. The tap is a really great button. It's used if I want to set a tempo. So if I'm trying to set a tempo, I don't really know what the tempo is. I just want the music to be this fast, right? So I can easily just go tap, 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 tap. And you can see it's around 70 So I'm just tapping this in tempo. If I wanted to go faster, 1, 2, 3, 4, you can see that it's now 130. So it will basically figure out what tempo you want. I use this all the time if I'm trying to, like, someone says, hey, can you make this music at this speed? Sure. And then I hit the tap tempo, and then I get a tempo marking. Let's go on over here. This is your time signature change marking. So you can set your global time signature over here with like 4/4, 6/8, whatever you're looking for. This is the metronome setting. So you can see the playhead is already going here because I hit the space bar, I'm assuming. If I hit the metronome, you can hear it's now going to tap tempo off. I also have some settings that I could change. We'll talk about those later, but I could change the type of tempo that I'm getting. Like this is only going to give me half notes, for instance. I could also just hit auto. That's always going to be the tempo. You can also set the key signature if you want for the music. I've never done this. I'm sure there's some value to it, maybe somewhere. Maybe it probably sets defaults when you use I don't know, arpeggiators maybe or something. I'm not sure. As we go on here, you can see this is showing me exactly where the playhead is at any time. So right now, the playhead is in measure 5, beat bar 1, beat 1, right? Or sorry, measure 1, beat 1, and then tick 1, I'm assuming. The next thing is obviously the playhead, which is also just the space bar. If I hit the space bar, it will start playing. If I hit the space bar again, it will stop. The stop button, and then the record button is the circle. We'll get into these later, these other ones, but if we go over here too, this also is useful in that it's very useful in Ableton to loop things. So I may set a loop parameter, like maybe I want to loop bar 49 to 57. So you can see that this is now going to play, it's looping from 49 and it's 8 measures long. And if I click on this button, it's now going to loop that music over and over and over, which can be very useful. As we go over here, we have several different modes here. This key mode is really useful. Let me see, I don't have an instrument in here. Okay, so if I, for instance, on this track, I chose an instrument called collision over here. It's kind of used to make bells and stuff like that. And if I have the MIDI, the little keyboard button turned on, now if I hit A, S, D, F, it's going to play notes on the piano. So it basically becomes a keyboard. If we go to key, this is used to do MIDI mapping and key mapping for individual notes. The MIDI map does something similar where if I have a keyboard with knobs and sliders, I can map a knob or a slider to a specific thing in the instrument. And then this is just basically listing, of course, the sample rate that the project's in. And then if we go over here again, these are the arrangement view, session view switchers. Okay. So let's now first talk about the individual track types. So there are 2 essential types of tracks in Ableton: MIDI tracks and audio tracks. Each of them, they're different, but they're also similar. You can see that I've chosen this MIDI track. I can also expand and contract it here with this. If we look over here though, the most important thing is these sets of buttons here. The one here is saying this is track number 1. If I click it, it's turning it off. If I click S, that's for soloing the track. And this is for recording track or record arming the track. So if I want to record in MIDI 1, I need to record arm this track. This is the volume control. So essentially at 0 dB, it means full volume. And I can just click and hold and drag this up and down to change it if I want to. If I hold down Shift, I can get very incremental, obviously it's going to show me smaller values and allow me to fine tune the volume. If I double click this, it's going to go back to 0. This is the panning left and right. So you can see here we have 50 on the left. That would be a complete hard pan to the left. And 50 is a hard pan to the right. So again, if I double click on this, it's going to put it in the center. This is called a send. I can send my sound to another channel if I want to using a send, and it also is a gain slider that allows me to set the amount of a signal that I want to send somewhere else, which we'll get to later in class. So you don't need to worry much about what's in here other than this last one, which should always, in our case, should be set to main, but that can change. But basically you're saying essentially, I want to send whatever that this track is doing out to the main outputs, and so it'll be set on main. Now audio is a little bit different. You can see audio has an input specifically. Now I can choose what the input is going to be. In this case, it is input 1 or 2, depending on what I have. If I use the Yeti Nano, which I think I'm using, I thought this was mono, but maybe it isn't. I can choose 1 or 2 or 1 and 2, and now I'm going to get a stereo signal coming in here. So, and the way this works, these in, off, and auto are related to like when the track is playing, if it's not recording, that kind of stuff, and then the main output here. But if I wanted to record, for instance, on audio 2, the second channel, I would have to record arm it by clicking on this button, and then I'm ready to record. If we go a little further here, there's not a whole lot more really to talk about other than a few things. So you can see down at the bottom, the timing is listed down here at the bottom of the track. So you can see this is the 30-second mark. This is the 1 minute mark, the 150. There is no timer up at the top, which tells you exactly how long your track is. But that's the basics. So these windows can be completely resized. I can take this down so I don't see it. I can expand it. If I wanted, for instance, to add something to a track, so say I want to record an instrument, let me just record a little something in here. So I have recorded in this track, and you can see the MIDI is here now. Now, right now, the only thing that's playing is this digital audio, but if I wanted, for instance, to add a reverb on top of it, I could go over here to audio effects. The hybrid reverb you can see is at the very top, and I can just click and drag this over here. And it's now added the reverb down here at the bottom to this channel. So now the MIDI channel here has a instrument and then a reverb, so it should sound a little different. Right, because the output now is being sent through the reverb and then to the output. So you can have a long string of effects here. So I could add a resonator and then a redux, and I can also just double click on these. If I double click on saturator, it's going to add the saturator to the channel. As you can see, it's been added. So has the redux, so has the resonator. And these effects will just pile up and change the sound over time. So, and then what happens too is down here at the bottom, we see this little window, which can be really useful for showing me more. I mean, I can have an effects chain that's very long in a track, and this allows me to kind of move this forward and backward so I can move to the end. I can also click in here and just like slide the mouse left and right by grabbing it and moving. In addition to that, the last button I'm going to talk about here is down at the very bottom here, which allows you to, it shows you options for things you want to show. So if I wanted to, for instance, like show the MIDI, the channel strip, I can click on this button. It will show the actual channel strip, but I could also, for instance, click on the little arrow again and add across the crossfader, which is a feature used mostly in the session view. But there's the crossfader, and now you can see our track has A and B, which is part of the crossfader. The last thing that I want to mention is if I double click what's called a clip, this is a MIDI clip, right? It's MIDI notes. We'll get into this in class. If I double click on this, it's now showing me the MIDI clip. Now there's a lot of stuff going on here that we'll talk about later, but this is your classic MIDI clip where I can edit the notes and add new notes if I wanted to. If I want to hear them, I click on this little headphones. If I want to delete them, I can hit B to return to the cursor. I can grab things and delete them, all kinds of things. But this window will pop up if I double click any sort of MIDI track, even an audio track. So we'll get into this more, but like for instance, if I grab audio here, you can see this is an audio clip and it's in an audio track. If I double click on this audio clip, it's going to also pull up down here at the bottom for me to edit and use. So anyways, that is the basics. You know, if just a couple quick things about navigation. If I want to zoom in and out of the track, which is really useful, what I need to do is click up. If you see what I do, if I come up to the top of this where the cursor turns into a little magnifying glass, if I click on the mouse button and move up and down, it's now going to resize this window. Okay. Also, if I want to loop things, so imagine I want to loop a specific set of measures. I can just, for instance, maybe I want to loop this audio signal, right? Or this MIDI clip. I can click on the MIDI clip one time, hit Command L to loop, and you can see the loop bracket now has been resized to fit just this loop, and it would play over and over. It's just going to go back to the beginning and play again. Okay, so a couple of other things that are useful. If I want to resize a MIDI clip, I can zoom in like this. Same thing with an audio. You can see the little bracket appears, and then I can resize this if I want. What else? If I want to play the music from a specific place, the easiest way to do this is to click on an audio track or a clip. Click on any clip and hit the space bar, and it's going to start from that clip. So if I click on this clip, you can see it's starting there. If I click on this clip, it's going to start from there. I can also, while something is playing, click on, if I go up to the top here, you can see where the little speaker is. If I click, it's going to start from that place. Okay. And again, if I go further up, it's going to turn into the magnifying glass. So anyways, that covers pretty much the basics of what I wanted to talk about in this video. And we'll go from here.